The rain had been falling over Manhattan since early morning, one of those persistent autumn drizzles that turned the city streets into rivers of reflected neon and made every step outside feel like a small act of defiance against the weather. By evening, the storm had intensified, sending most people rushing for shelter, umbrellas turned inside out by the wind that howled between the skyscrapers. Inside Marcello's, a mid-range Italian restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a vintage bookstore in Little Italy, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. The smell of garlic, basil, and freshly baked bread filled the air, mixing with the soft jazz playing from speakers mounted in the corners. Red-checkered tablecloths covered each table, and strings of warm lights hung from the exposed brick walls, giving the place a cozy, old-world charm that had kept it in business for nearly 40 years. Maya Chen moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her white shirt and black apron spotless despite having been on shift for 6 hours. At 26, she had the kind of face that people forgot easily, not because she wasn't attractive, but because she had perfected the art of being invisible. In her line of work, invisibility was a survival skill. More water for table 7, she noted mentally, balancing 3 plates of pasta along her left arm while carrying a basket of breadsticks in her right hand. She'd been waitressing at Marcello's for 8 months now, ever since moving to New York from Seattle. It wasn't the career she'd planned, but life had a way of rerouting your journey when you least expected it. "Maya, honey, table 12 needs their check," called out Rosa, the older waitress who'd worked at Marcello's since it opened. Rosa had taken Maya under her wing from day one, teaching her the unwritten rules of restaurant survival. Always smile, never argue with customers, and keep your personal life personal. "On it," Maya responded, sliding the pasta plates onto table 9 with a practiced smile. "Enjoy your meal. Can I get you anything else?" The couple at the table barely looked up from their phones, shaking their heads in dismissal. Maya had long ago stopped taking it personally. In a city of 8 million people, everyone was fighting their own battles, carrying their own burdens. She was just part of the background noise of their evening. As she printed the check for table 12, Maya glanced at the clock. 7:45. Another hour and 15 minutes until her shift ended. Then the long subway ride back to her studio apartment in Brooklyn, where her younger brother's medical bills waited in a stack on her kitchen counter. $3,000 this month. The thought made her stomach tighten, but she pushed it away. One problem at a time, one table at a time, one day at a time. That's when she noticed the man in the corner booth. He'd been sitting there for over an hour, barely touching his food. Unlike most customers who came to Marcello's for the atmosphere and conversation, this man seemed to exist in a bubble of absolute stillness. He was young, maybe early 30s, with dark hair styled back, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months. A cigar rested in the ashtray beside him, unlit, as if waiting for the right moment. 2 other men sat at a nearby table, clearly with him but maintaining a respectful distance. They wore suits too, though not as expensive, and their eyes constantly scanned the restaurant with the alertness of people trained to notice everything. Security, Maya had guessed when they first arrived. Rich businessmen often traveled with bodyguards in New York. What struck Maya most was how the man in the corner watched everything. Not obviously, he appeared relaxed, almost bored, but she'd caught his eyes tracking movement throughout the restaurant with an interest that seemed more than casual. When she'd served his table earlier, he'd thanked her with a slight nod, his gaze lingering on her face for just a moment longer than necessary, as if he were memorizing it. Something about him made her uneasy, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way the air seemed heavier around his booth, or how other customers instinctively lowered their voices when passing his table. Power, she realized. He carried it like a second skin. "Maya, table 5 needs you." Rosa's voice cut through her thoughts. Table 5. Maya's jaw tightened as she turned toward it. Connor Bradley sat there, leaning back in his chair with the entitled sprawl of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. Mid-40s, expensive watch, designer clothes, and an attitude that had made him a problem from the moment he walked in 2 hours ago. He'd started with small comments, complaining about the temperature of his wine, sending back his steak twice, snapping his fingers to get her attention. Maya had handled it all with professional grace, the way she'd been trained. Smile, apologize, accommodate. The customer is always right even when they're absolutely wrong. But Connor Bradley wasn't satisfied with being difficult. As the evening progressed and he worked through his third bottle of wine, his comments had shifted from complaints to something more personal. Comments about her appearance, suggestions about what she should do after her shift, requests for her phone number disguised as friendly interest. Each time Maya had deflected politely, maintaining her professional distance while screaming internally. She needed this job. She couldn't afford to make a scene, couldn't risk a complaint to management. So she smiled and endured, the way countless service workers did every single day. "You're ignoring me, sweetheart," Connor called out as she approached, his voice carrying across the restaurant. Several other diners looked up, uncomfortable. "I've been trying to get your attention for 5 minutes." "I apologize, sir. How can I help you?" Maya kept her voice level, her expression neutral. "Help me?" Connor laughed, the sound ugly and sharp. "You can start by showing some respect. I've been a customer here for years and I don't appreciate being treated like I'm invisible." "I truly apologize if you felt that way, sir. Is there something wrong with your meal?" "My meal?" He gestured at his nearly empty plate with disgust. The meal was mediocre at best, just like the service, just like everything in this cheap establishment. Maya felt heat rising in her chest but kept it locked down. "I'm sorry you feel that way. Would you like me to speak with the manager?" "I want you to stop acting like you're too good to talk to me," Connor said, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. "You've been walking around here all night like you own the place, barely giving me the time of day. I came here to have a nice evening and you've ruined it with your attitude." Rosa appeared at Maya's elbow, sensing trouble. "Is everything all right here?" "Everything's fine," Maya said quickly. "I was just about to—" "No, everything's not fine," Connor interrupted, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He was taller than Maya had realized, using his height to loom over her intimidatingly. "I'm tired of her disrespect. I'm tired of this whole place treating me like I'm nobody." "Sir, please sit down," Rosa said firmly, her grandmother voice coming out. "You're disturbing other guests." "I'll sit down when I get an apology," Connor said, taking a step closer to Maya. She could smell the wine on his breath now, could see the flush of aggression in his face. A real apology, not that fake service industry nonsense. Maya's hands clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to breathe. "I apologize if I offended you in any way, sir. That was never my intention." "See? That's exactly what I mean." Connor's voice rose sharply. "You don't mean it. You don't respect me at all. You think you're better than me, don't you?" The restaurant had gone quiet now. Everyone was watching. Maya could feel dozens of eyes on her, could see her manager emerging from the kitchen with concern written across his face. This was escalating quickly, spiraling into something she couldn't control. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Maya's manager Tony said as he hurried over. "You're intoxicated, and you're making other customers uncomfortable." "Intoxicated?" Connor's laugh was bitter. "I've had a few drinks, sure, but that doesn't give your staff the right to disrespect me. This one," he pointed aggressively at Maya, "has been rude to me all evening. She needs to be disciplined." "I think you should go," Tony said, his voice harder now. "I'll comp your meal, but you need to leave. Now." For a moment, Maya thought it might be over. Connor looked at Tony, then at the watching crowd, and something seemed to deflate in him. He reached for his jacket hanging on the chair. Then he turned back to Maya and his expression shifted into something cruel. "You know what your problem is?" he said quietly, stepping into her personal space. "You think you're special. You think because you're young and pretty that you can treat people however you want. But you're just a waitress. You're nobody. And you need to learn your place." Before Maya could respond, before Tony could intervene, Connor reached out and grabbed her wrist. Hard. His fingers dug into her skin with bruising force and he yanked her toward him. "I said you need to learn your place," he repeated, his face inches from hers. Everything that happened next occurred in the space of a heartbeat. Years of training that Maya had hoped never to use again, training from a life she'd left behind, took over. Her body moved on instinct, on muscle memory that ran deeper than conscious thought. She didn't think about the restaurant or the watching crowd or the consequences. She only thought about the grip on her wrist, the threat in his eyes, the violation of her space. Her free hand came up in a tight, controlled motion. Palm heel strike, aimed precisely at Connor's solar plexus. The impact was clean and devastating. Connor's eyes went wide with shock. The air exploded from his lungs in a gasping wheeze. His grip on her wrist released instantly as his body tried to process what had happened. He stumbled backward, arms windmilling for balance, and his hip caught the edge of his table. The momentum carried him over, and he crashed to the floor with his table on top of him, plates and glasses shattering around him in a spectacular cascade. The restaurant erupted in gasps and shouts. Maya stood frozen, her hand still raised, staring at the man sprawled on the floor among the wreckage. Connor lay there gasping like a fish, struggling to draw breath into his shocked diaphragm, completely incapacitated by a single blow. "Oh my God," Rosa breathed beside her. Tony rushed forward, calling for someone to call an ambulance. Other customers pulled out their phones, some filming, others genuinely calling for help. The two busboys hurried over to help Connor, who was slowly regaining his breath, his face red and furious. And in the corner booth, the man in the charcoal suit watched it all unfold. A slow smile spread across his face, not cruel but genuinely amused, impressed even. He reached for his cigar, took out a silver lighter, and lit it with deliberate care. The flame illuminated his features for a moment. Sharp cheekbones, intelligent eyes, and that smile that suggested he'd just witnessed something far more interesting than anything he'd expected to see tonight. He took a long draw from the cigar, exhaled a perfect stream of smoke, and leaned back in his booth. One of his security men started to stand, but the man in the corner raised a finger slightly, and his guard immediately sat back down. His eyes never left Maya. Maya barely noticed. Her whole body was shaking now, adrenaline flooding her system. She looked down at her hands, steady during the moment of action, trembling now in the aftermath. What had she done? She'd just struck a customer. She'd destroyed property. She was going to be fired, possibly arrested. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd carefully built since coming to New York, was collapsing around her. "Maya," Tony said, his voice tight and controlled. "Go to my office, now." "Tony," he grabbed her. Rosa protested. "You saw it." He put his hands on her first. "I saw," Tony said, his face conflicted. "But that doesn't change what happened." "Maya, my office, please." Maya nodded numbly and walked toward the back, her legs feeling disconnected from her body. As she passed the corner booth, she felt the weight of the man's gaze on her. She risked a glance in his direction. He raised his glass to her in a small salute, that amused smile still playing on his lips. His eyes held something she couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe, or recognition, as if he'd just discovered something valuable in a place he hadn't expected to find it. Then she was past him, pushing through the kitchen doors into the fluorescent brightness beyond. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur. Tony was sympathetic but firm. He couldn't keep her on staff, not after what happened. It didn't matter that Connor had grabbed her first. It didn't matter that she'd been defending herself. The liability was too great, and Connor was already threatening to sue. "I'm sorry, Maya," Tony said, and he genuinely seemed to be. "You're a good worker, but I can't have staff putting hands on customers no matter what the circumstances. I'll give you 2 weeks' pay and I won't contest unemployment if you file. That's the best I can do." Maya nodded, too numb to argue. She cleaned out her locker, changed out of her uniform, and walked back through the restaurant to leave. The police had been called but hadn't arrived yet. Connor had been helped to a chair, ice pack on his chest, still wheezing but recovering. He glared at her with pure hatred as she passed. The rain had intensified into a full storm when Maya stepped outside. She stood under the restaurant's awning, watching water cascade off the edge, trying to process what had just happened. Fired. She'd lost her job. How was she going to pay rent? How was she going to cover her brother's medical bills? "Interesting form," a voice said beside her. Maya jumped, turning to find the man from the corner booth standing next to her. Up close, he was even more imposing than she'd realized. Tall, well over 6 feet, with a presence that seemed to push against the air around him. But his eyes, dark and assessing, held no threat, just that same curious interest. "Excuse me?" Maya managed. "Your strike. Palm heel. Perfect placement. Controlled force. That's not something you pick up from a weekend self-defense class." He took another draw from his cigar, the tip glowing red in the darkness. "Military? Law enforcement? I don't know what you're talking about," Maya said automatically, taking a step back. "Of course you don't," he said, that smile returning. "Just like that wasn't a trained defensive response in there. Just like you didn't assess the threat, identify the opening, and neutralize it with minimal necessary force. Pure coincidence." Maya's heart hammered in her chest. "Look, I don't know who you are, but I just lost my job. I'm not in the mood for whatever this is." "Understandable," He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, so as not to startle her, and pulled out a business card. "But before you disappear into the rain, consider taking this." Maya looked at the card but didn't take it. "What is it?" "An opportunity," he said simply. "You're clearly skilled, clearly in need of employment, and clearly underutilizing your talents serving pasta to people who don't appreciate you. Are you offering me a job?" Maya asked skeptically. "I'm offering you a conversation," he corrected. "What happens after that conversation is entirely up to you. No pressure, no obligation, just a chance to discuss possibilities. I don't even know your name." "Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "Marcus Vitale." Maya didn't take his hand. Something about the name rang a bell in the back of her mind, though she couldn't place it. "And what kind of possibilities would we be discussing, Marcus?" "The kind that would put your skills to better use than dodging grabby customers for minimum wage plus tips," he said. "The kind that might actually pay enough to cover whatever's weighing on you so heavily that you took a job you're overqualified for in the first place." Maya felt her blood run cold. "How do you—" "I'm observant," Marcus said smoothly. "It's part of my business. And I observe that you're former military, probably honorably discharged, that you're supporting someone, family member most likely, with significant financial needs, that you moved here recently, trying to start fresh, and that you're running from something in your past. Am I close?" "Too close. Dangerously close." Maya took another step back. "I think you should leave me alone." "Probably," Marcus agreed, "but you should take the card anyway. Because in about 3 hours you're going to be sitting in your apartment, looking at bills you can't pay and wondering what comes next. When that moment arrives, you'll want to know you have options." He placed the card on the ledge of the awning, weighted it down with a small stone and stepped back. "Or throw it away. Your choice entirely. Either way, it was a pleasure watching you work, Maya Chen." He knew her full name. Of course he did. Maya watched as he walked to a black car waiting at the curb. Expensive, sleek, German. One of his security men opened the door and Marcus slid inside. The car pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. Maya stood there for a long moment staring at the business card. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed lettering. Just a name, Marcus Vitale, and a phone number. No company name, no title, nothing else. She should throw it away. Every instinct screamed at her to leave it there, to walk away, to pretend this conversation had never happened. Men like that, men who moved with that kind of confidence, who saw too much, who knew too much, were dangerous. She'd left that world behind. She'd promised herself she was done with danger. But as lightning flashed overhead and thunder rolled through the city streets, Maya found herself picking up the card and sliding it into her pocket. Just in case, she told herself. Just in case. She pulled her jacket tighter against the rain and stepped out into the storm, heading for the subway station. Behind her, Marcello's warm lights continued to glow, but she didn't look back. That chapter of her life was closed now, ended with a single punch and a shattered table. What lay ahead she didn't know, but she had a feeling she'd be making that phone call sooner than she wanted to admit. The subway car rattled through the tunnel beneath Manhattan, fluorescent lights flickering overhead as Maya stared at her reflection in the dark window across from her. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair still damp from the rain, her white shirt wrinkled under her jacket. But what bothered her most was the look in her own eyes. Uncertainty, fear. She'd spent the last 8 months carefully constructing a safe, predictable life. Wake up, go to work, smile, serve, collect tips, go home, repeat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. It was anonymous. It was exactly what she needed after everything that had happened in Seattle. Now, in the span of 30 minutes, that carefully constructed life had shattered like the plates on Connor Bradley's table. Maya pulled out her phone and opened her banking app, even though she knew what she'd see. Checking account, 847. Savings, fund 203s. Rent due in 12 days, $1,400. Her brother Jamie's physical therapy bill, $2,800, overdue by 3 weeks. The hospital had been patient so far, but their last letter had mentioned collections. She closed the app and pressed her forehead against the cool window. $2,050. That's what she needed to stay afloat this month. Not counting food, utilities, or the subway pass, she'd need to look for another job. Even with 2 weeks severance from Tony, she'd be short by at least $1,500. The card in her pocket seemed to burn against her leg. She pulled it out, studying it under the harsh subway lighting. Marcus Vitale. The name had been nagging at her since he'd driven away. She'd heard it somewhere before, she was certain, but couldn't place where. Maya opened her phone's browser and typed in the name. The results made her stomach drop. Marcus Vitale wasn't just wealthy. He was a known figure in New York's business community. Real estate holdings across 3 boroughs. Import-export businesses. Several restaurants and nightclubs. On the surface, everything looked legitimate. Successful entrepreneur, philanthropist, supporter of local businesses. But as Maya scrolled deeper, reading between the lines of carefully worded articles, she began to understand what wasn't being said directly. References to alleged connections to organized groups, investigations that had gone nowhere, associates with questionable backgrounds. One article from 3 years ago detailed federal attention on his businesses, but nothing had come of it. The picture that emerged was of a man who operated in the gray spaces between legal and illegal, who had power and influence that went far beyond what his legitimate businesses would suggest. A man who was never directly implicated in anything but was always hovering at the edges of stories about corruption, territorial disputes between business rivals, and the complex web of power that ran beneath New York's glittering surface. Maya should have been terrified. Instead, she felt a strange sense of clarity. She knew what Marcus Vitale was. More importantly, she knew what he was offering without him having to say it explicitly. He needed people with skills, her skills, for work that couldn't be advertised on job boards or discussed in polite company. Security work, probably. Protection. Problem-solving of the kind that required both discretion and capability. She'd sworn she was done with that life. After 6 years in the Marines, after everything she'd seen and done, she'd wanted nothing more than to disappear into civilian anonymity. No more violence. No more danger. No more living on the edge of acceptable behavior. But life had other plans. The subway reached her stop in Brooklyn. Maya stepped out onto the platform, climbing the stairs to street level where the rain had finally slowed to a light drizzle. The walk to her apartment building took 15 minutes through streets that grew progressively quieter and more residential. Her studio apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse, small but clean, with large windows that let in good light during the day. It was all she could afford, but it was hers. She'd furnished it carefully with second-hand finds, making it feel like a home rather than just a place to sleep. Tonight, though, it felt like a cage. Maya dropped her bag by the door and went straight to her laptop, opening her email. 3 new messages, all bills. Electric company, on $27. Phone, $85. Jamie's updated treatment plan from his physical therapist in Seattle. $3,200 for the next 3 months of sessions he desperately needed. Her brother had been in a car accident 18 months ago. Not his fault. Someone ran a red light and T-boned his driver's side at 40 miles per hour. He'd survived, but the injuries to his legs and spine had been severe. The driver who hit him had no insurance, and Jamie's policy had maxed out after the initial surgeries. Everything since then, the physical therapy, the ongoing care, the specialist appointments, fell on Maya. She'd left the Marines specifically to help him, had moved to New York to find work that paid better than Seattle's job market offered, had taken the waitressing position because it was immediate income while she figured out what else she could do with her particular skill set. And now even that was gone. Maya walked to her window and looked out over Brooklyn's rooftops. Somewhere out there, across the river, Marcus Vitale was probably in his expensive penthouse or his exclusive club, not giving her a second thought. He'd made his offer. Whether she took it or not was irrelevant to him, but it wasn't irrelevant to her. She thought about Connor Bradley's hand on her wrist, his breath in her face, his sense of entitlement to her space and her body. She thought about how satisfying it had been to watch him fall, to see that shocked expression replace his cruel confidence. She thought about the months of being invisible, of swallowing her pride, of pretending to be less than she was. Maya pulled out Marcus's card again. She shouldn't call. She should go to bed, wake up tomorrow, and start applying for other service jobs. Bartending, maybe. Or retail. Something safe. Something that didn't involve men like Marcus Vitale and whatever world he inhabited. Instead, she found herself dialing the number. It rang twice before a male voice answered. "Yes? My name is Maya Chen," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Marcus Vitale gave me this number." One moment. Silence. Maya's heart hammered. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she should just hang up. Pretend this never. "Maya." Marcus's voice came on the line, warm and unsurprised. as if he'd been expecting her call. "I thought I might hear from you tonight. You don't know anything about me," Maya said, more defensively than she intended. "I know you're practical," Marcus replied. "I know you're smart enough to research who I am before calling. And I know you're calling anyway, which tells me everything I need to know about your situation. So let's skip the part where we pretend this is anything other than what it is. You need money. I need capable people. We should talk." His directness was almost refreshing after months of polite social scripts at the restaurant. "What exactly would we be talking about?" "Not over the phone," Marcus said. "Can you meet tomorrow? There's a coffee shop in Midtown. Neutral territory, public location. We'll talk. You'll hear what I'm offering and then you decide. No pressure." "There's always pressure," Maya said quietly. "Fair point," Marcus acknowledged. "But I'm not in the business of forcing people into situations they don't want. That's bad for everyone involved. I'm offering you a choice, Maya. What you do with it is entirely up to you." Maya closed her eyes. This was the moment. Say no, hang up, and figure out something else. Anything else. "What time tomorrow?" she heard herself ask. 10 a.m. Meridian Coffee on West 47th Street. I'll buy you breakfast." "I'll be there," Maya said, and hung up before she could change her mind. She spent the rest of the night not sleeping, staring at her ceiling, running through scenarios of how this meeting might go. By the time dawn broke over Brooklyn, she'd convinced herself to back out at least a dozen times. But when her alarm went off at 8, she got up, showered, and dressed carefully. Not her waitress uniform. Not anymore. She chose dark jeans, boots, a simple black sweater, clothes that let her move, that didn't attract attention, that said she was taking this seriously without trying too hard. The subway ride into Manhattan felt longer than usual. Maya rehearsed what she might say, how she'd negotiate, what her boundaries were, but she knew deep down that boundaries were luxuries people with options could afford. She didn't have options right now. Meridian Coffee was tucked into the ground floor of an office building, the kind of place where business deals happened over lattes and croissants. Clean lines, minimalist design, expensive coffee drinks. Maya arrived 10 minutes early and ordered a black coffee she couldn't really afford, choosing a table near the window where she could watch the door. Marcus arrived exactly at 10, alone this time, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. He spotted her immediately, that same slight smile on his face, and walked over. "You came," he said, sitting down across from her. "I'm glad." "You said no pressure," Maya reminded him. "I'm here to listen. That's all. That's all I ask." Marcus signaled to the barista. "Have you eaten?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look like you didn't sleep, and I'm guessing you skipped breakfast to save money." He ordered without waiting for her response. 2 egg sandwiches, fruit, pastries. "Humor me. Business conversations go better on a full stomach." Despite herself, Maya felt a flicker of appreciation. He wasn't wrong about the sleep or the skipped breakfast. When the food arrived, Marcus waited until she'd taken a few bites before speaking. "Tell me about your military service." Maya paused mid-bite. "How did you— the way you move, the way you assessed threats last night, the way you're sitting now, back to the wall, clear view of exits, hands free." Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "Marines, I'm guessing. Security forces or military police?" "I don't see how that's relevant," Maya said carefully. "It's relevant because I need to understand what you're capable of. I need to know if what I saw last night was a fluke or if it's representative of your actual training and experience." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking you to compromise anything classified. I'm asking you to be honest about your capabilities so I can make you a legitimate offer." Maya set down her sandwich. 6 years. Marines. I did force protection and tactical security operations. Honorable discharge 16 months ago. Why did you leave? Family situation required it. Marcus nodded, not pushing for details. And Seattle? That's where you came from? You already know that. I know the basics. I don't know why you left a city where you presumably had connections and support to come to New York where you knew no one. Marcus's eyes were sharp, assessing. People don't usually make moves like that without a good reason. Maya considered how much to share. Seattle's job market wasn't offering what I needed. New York had better opportunities, that's all. It wasn't all, of course. She'd left Seattle because she couldn't find work that used her skills without compromising her principles. Because the security firms that wanted to hire her were offering positions that felt too much like her military work, protecting people who didn't deserve protection. looking the other way at questionable activities, being complicit in things she didn't want to be part of. She thought waitressing would be different. Honest work, simple work, safe work. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded, as if he'd heard everything she hadn't said. I'll be direct with you, Maya, because I think you'll appreciate that more than careful dancing around the subject. I run several legitimate businesses in New York, but I also operate in spaces that require discretion. I have interests that need protecting, partnerships that need maintaining, problems that need solving. For that, I need people I can trust who have both the skills and the judgment to handle sensitive situations. You're talking about security work, Maya said. I'm talking about being part of my inner circle. Security, yes, but also consultation, problem solving, and occasionally being my eyes and ears in places where my face is too well known. Marcus paused. I'm not going to lie to you. This work exists in gray areas. Nothing illegal that would put you at risk of prosecution, but definitely situations that require flexibility in how you interpret rules and regulations. And if I'm not comfortable with that flexibility, then you tell me your boundaries up front and I respect them. I don't ask people to compromise their principles, Maya. I ask them to be realistic about the world we actually live in versus the world we wish we lived in. Marcus finished his coffee. You spent 6 years protecting people and interests that weren't always clean. You know how the real world works. He wasn't wrong. Maya had done plenty of things in the Marines that existed in moral gray areas. Protecting supply routes that she suspected carried more than just official cargo. Standing guard while officers had meetings she wasn't supposed to overhear. Looking the other way when allies did things that would have been unacceptable if Americans did them. What's the pay? She asked. Marcus smiled, recognizing the shift in her questions. Starting salary, $75,000 annually. Housing allowance of $2,000 monthly, health insurance and performance bonuses that typically add another $20,000 to $30,000 per year. You'd be on call but not every day. I have multiple people on rotation. When you're not actively working, your time is your own. Maya's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. $75,000. That was more than double what she'd made waitressing. With the housing allowance, she could move somewhere safer, maybe even big enough for Jamie to visit. She could pay off his medical bills in months instead of years. That seems excessive for security work, she said cautiously. It's not excessive for discretion and loyalty, Marcus corrected. I pay well because I expect excellence. I also pay well because I need people who aren't tempted to moonlight for my competitors or compromise my interests for outside money. When you work for me, you work exclusively for me. And if I want out, then you give me notice, we part professionally, and you sign paperwork ensuring you don't discuss my business with anyone. No different than any other confidential employment. Marcus pulled a document from his briefcase. This is a standard employment contract. Take it home, read it, have a lawyer review it if you want. It outlines everything we've discussed. Salary, benefits, expectations, termination clauses. Maya took the contract, flipping through it. It looked surprisingly legitimate. Proper legal language, clear terms, nothing that seemed overtly problematic. Of course, the devil was always in the details. What would I actually be doing? She asked. Day to day? Initially, accompanying me to meetings as security, standing watch at properties I own, occasionally checking in on business partners to ensure they're honoring agreements. Basically, being a visible presence that reminds people I take my interests seriously. Marcus leaned back. As I get to know your capabilities better, the work would evolve. Maybe you'd oversee security for one of my clubs. Maybe you'd handle negotiations with suppliers who need a firm hand. Maybe you'd train other security personnel. And the situations that require flexibility, confronting people who've overstepped boundaries, recovering property that's been taken without permission, ensuring that agreements made verbally are honored even when people try to back out. Marcus met her eyes directly. I won't lie to you, Maya. Sometimes that involves intimidation. Sometimes it involves physical presence that makes people nervous. But it doesn't involve you doing anything you'd be ashamed of. I'm not asking you to hurt innocent people or compromise your morals. I'm asking you to help me maintain order in a world where official channels don't always work. Maya thought about Connor Bradley, about how satisfying it had been to stop him from escalating his aggression. She thought about the men she'd dealt with in the Marines who thought they could push boundaries because they outranked her or outnumbered her. She thought about the frustration of following rules that protected the wrong people while leaving others vulnerable. I need to think about this, she said finally. Of course. Marcus stood, leaving the contract on the table between them. Take 3 days. Read everything. Make your decision. If you want the job, call me. If you don't, I'll wish you well and you'll never hear from me again." He started to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Maya. Last night when you dropped that man, you showed restraint. You could have done much worse, I could see that in how you moved. But you used exactly the force necessary to stop the threat without seriously injuring him. That's the kind of judgment I value. That's why I'm making you this offer." After he left, Maya sat alone for another hour, reading through the contract while her coffee grew cold. Everything looked legitimate on paper. The salary was real. The benefits were real. The work, while existing in gray areas, didn't seem to cross lines she couldn't live with. But she knew this was a threshold moment. Once she stepped into Marcus Vitale's world, there would be no going back to the simple invisibility she'd tried to create. She'd be part of something larger, something with its own rules and expectations and consequences. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jamie's physical therapist. "Maya, I wanted to give you a heads up before you get the official notice. Jamie's insurance appeal was denied. We need to discuss payment options for continuing his treatment." Maya closed her eyes, the decision crystallizing with painful clarity. She'd spent 8 months trying to be someone she wasn't, trying to pretend that her skills and training didn't exist, that she could just blend in and be normal. But normal didn't pay Jamie's medical bills. Normal didn't give her agency over her own life. Normal was just another word for powerless. Marcus was offering her power, not unlimited power, and not without costs, but power nonetheless. The power to solve her financial problems. The power to use her training for something other than serving people who didn't respect her. The power to stop being invisible and start being seen, even if only by the few people in Marcus's circle. Maya pulled out her phone and typed a message. "I'm in. When do I start?" The response came within seconds. "Monday, 9 a.m. I'll send you the address. Welcome to the team, Maya." She gathered the contract, finished her cold coffee, and walked out into the Manhattan morning. The sun had broken through the clouds, and the city seemed sharper somehow, more vivid. Or maybe that was just her perception changing, knowing that she was about to step into a completely different life. As she descended into the subway station, Maya caught her reflection in a shop window. She looked different already, shoulders back, head up, eyes clear, not invisible, not powerless. Dangerous maybe, but at least she'd be dangerous on her own terms. The train carried her back to Brooklyn, where she'd spend the weekend preparing for whatever Monday would bring. She'd left one world behind in the Marines. She'd tried to build another in Seattle and failed. She'd attempted a third here in New York, and it had lasted all of 8 months. Maybe the fourth time would be different. Maybe this time, instead of running from who she was, she'd finally figure out how to be that person in a way she could live with. Or maybe she was making a terrible mistake that would change everything. Either way, there was no going back now. The card she'd almost thrown away in the rain had become a lifeline. The man who'd watched her with such interest from his corner booth had become her new employer. And the waitress who'd spent months being invisible was about to become very visible indeed. Maya just hoped she was ready for what that would mean. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made New York feel full of possibility. Maya stood outside the address Marcus had sent her, a renovated warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a discreet entrance that gave no indication of what business operated inside. She'd dressed carefully. Black tactical pants, a fitted dark gray shirt, comfortable boots. Professional but practical. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore minimal jewelry. She looked like what she was, someone ready to work, not to be looked at. Taking a deep breath, Maya pressed the intercom button. "Name," a voice crackled through the speaker. "Maya Chen, I'm expected." The door buzzed open. Maya stepped into a minimalist reception area. Polished concrete floors, exposed brick walls, modern furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. A young woman sat behind a sleek desk, perfectly styled, looking up with professional courtesy. "Ms. Chen, welcome. Mr. Vitale is waiting for you on the 3rd floor. Elevators to your left." Maya nodded and walked toward the elevator, her boots echoing in the quiet space. The building had been gutted and renovated with obvious care and considerable expense. This wasn't some shadowy back alley operation. This was a legitimate business headquarters, or at least it looked like one. The elevator opened on the 3rd floor to reveal an open-plan office space. Several people worked at desks, typing on computers, talking on phones, conducting what looked like normal business operations. But Maya's trained eye caught the details that weren't quite normal. The security cameras positioned at every angle, the reinforced door frames, the subtle bulges under several people's jackets that suggested concealed weapons. You must be the new girl. Maya turned to find a woman in her early 30s approaching. Athletic build, sharp eyes, dark hair cut in a no-nonsense bob. She wore fitted black clothing similar to Maya's own, and moved with the controlled grace of someone who knew how to handle herself. Maya Chen, Maya said, extending her hand. Lucia Ramos. The woman's handshake was firm. Testing. Head of Security Operations. Marcus told me you were starting today. Former Marine, right? 6 years. Good. We can use someone with actual training. Lucia gestured for Maya to follow her. Most of the people Marcus hires have more attitude than skill. It'll be nice to work with a professional for a change. They walked through the office space toward a conference room at the far end. This is the operations center, Lucia explained. We coordinate all of Marcus's business interests from here. Security schedules, property management, business meetings, everything. Looks normal, right? That's the point. What's the reality? Maya asked. Lucia smiled approvingly. The reality is that about 60% of what we do here is completely legitimate. Property management, security services, business consulting. The other 40% exists in gray areas. Marcus has interests all over the city. Clubs, restaurants, import businesses, real estate. Not everyone who deals with him wants to play fair. Our job is to make sure they do. They entered the conference room where Marcus sat with 2 other men. Papers spread across the table. He looked up as they entered, that same slight smile appearing. Maya, right on time. Good. He gestured to the chairs. Sit. We're just finishing up a situation that will be your first assignment. Maya sat next to Lucia, studying the 2 men across the table. One was in his 50s, well-dressed but nervous, wiping his palms on his pants. The other was younger, maybe Marcus's age, with hard eyes and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Gentlemen, this is Maya Chen, our newest security specialist, Marcus said casually. Maya, this is Vincent Russo, who owns a restaurant in the Bronx that I helped finance 3 years ago. And this is his nephew Tony, who apparently has been skimming from the receipts. Vincent turned pale. Marcus, I swear I didn't know. You didn't know your own nephew was stealing from you? Marcus's voice remained pleasant, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Vincent, we've been partners for 3 years. I've given you favorable terms, helped you expand, asked for very little in return. The one thing I require is honesty. So when my accountant notices that your reported revenue doesn't match your actual traffic patterns, that's a problem. I can fix it, Vincent said desperately. Tony, tell him. Tell him you'll fix it. Tony said nothing, his jaw tight with resentment. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Here's what's going to happen. Tony is going to repay every dollar he took. Not to me, but to you, Vincent, because that's who he actually stole from. He's going to do it by working in your restaurant for free. Every single shift, until the debt is cleared. And Maya here is going to visit your establishment twice a week to review your books and ensure nothing like this happens again. That's not necessary, Vincent protested weakly. I can handle my own family. You've demonstrated that you can't, Marcus said flatly. So now you have oversight. Be grateful I'm not dissolving our partnership entirely. He turned to Maya. You'll start tomorrow. Lucia will give you the details. Your job is to verify their numbers, observe their operations, and report back to me weekly. Any irregularities, any problems, you tell me immediately. Understood, Maya said. Marcus nodded to Lucia, who stood. We're done here, gentlemen. Vincent, you have 3 days to get your nephew on a proper repayment schedule. If there are any problems, call me. Don't make me come looking for you. After Vincent and Tony left looking thoroughly chastened, Marcus turned to Maya with an appraising look. That's the basic formula for most of what we do. People make agreements. Sometimes they forget the terms. We remind them. Usually that's enough. Occasionally it requires more persuasive methods. And when it requires more? Maya asked. We'll get to that, Marcus said. For now, you shadow Lucia. Learn how we operate. Meet the team. Understand the systems. In 2 weeks, we'll evaluate whether this is working for both of us. The next few days passed in a blur of learning and observation. Maya discovered that Marcus's organization was far more sophisticated than she'd expected. Everything was documented, tracked, and managed through professional systems. It wasn't some chaotic criminal operation. It was a well-run business that just happened to operate in spaces where traditional law enforcement didn't reach. She met the rest of the team. Carlos, a former NYPD officer who handled investigations, Derek, who managed Marcus's real estate holdings, Nina, who ran the legitimate consulting business that served as the organization's public face. All of them were professionals. All of them understood they were working in gray areas, and all of them seemed to respect the structure Marcus had created, but not everyone welcomed Maya's presence. "So you're Marcus's new pet project," a voice said behind her on her third day. Maya turned to find a man in his late 20s leaning against the doorframe of the small office she'd been assigned. He was handsome in an obvious way. Styled hair, expensive clothes, the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "I'm Maya. You are?" "Daniel Caruso. I handle Marcus's club operations." He walked into her office uninvited, making himself comfortable in her spare chair. "I heard about your little display at the restaurant. Very impressive taking down a customer like that." "He grabbed me first," Maya said evenly. "Oh, I'm not criticizing. I'm just wondering what makes you so special that Marcus is paying you top-tier salary when you've been here less than a week." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Most of us had to prove ourselves for months before getting the kind of access you've been given. Maybe I bring different skills than most people. Maybe. Or maybe Marcus is thinking with something other than his business sense." Daniel stood, moving closer than was comfortable. "Just a friendly warning, there are people here who've been loyal to Marcus for years. Don't expect special treatment just because you know how to throw a punch." After he left, Lucia appeared in the doorway. "Don't let Daniel get to you. He's been angling for a promotion to head of security for 2 years. And he's not happy that Marcus brought in outside talent." "Is he going to be a problem?" Maya asked. "Only if you let him intimidate you, which I don't think you will." Lucia handed her a file. "Speaking of which, you have your first real assignment tomorrow. Marcus needs security at a meeting with some business partners from Philadelphia. They're expanding into New York and want to discuss territorial arrangements. Your job is to stand there, look capable, and make sure nobody tries anything stupid." The meeting took place at one of Marcus's restaurants in Chelsea, upscale Italian, closed for the lunch hour specifically for this gathering. Maya arrived early, checking exits, identifying potential problems, positioning herself where she could observe the entire room. Marcus arrived with 2 of his senior associates. The Philadelphia group came 10 minutes later, 3 men in expensive suits accompanied by their own security. Maya recognized the type immediately. People who'd been doing this kind of work for decades, who'd seen and handled every possible situation. The meeting itself was surprisingly cordial. Discussions of territories, revenue sharing, dispute resolution protocols. It was a business negotiation, just one conducted by people whose businesses operated outside traditional legal frameworks. Maya stood against the wall, professionally alert, and tried not to think about how surreal this was. A week ago she'd been serving pasta. Now she was providing security for high-level territorial negotiations between organized groups. Everything went smoothly until the dessert course. One of the Philadelphia men, older, with the scars and broken knuckles of someone who'd come up through the ranks the hard way, turned to Marcus with a smile that didn't quite work. "This has been productive, Marcus. I appreciate you being reasonable about the boundary arrangements." He paused. "There is one other matter. Small thing, really. One of your people has been talking to our competitors, sharing information about our operations, our routes, our partnerships." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "That's a serious accusation," Marcus said quietly. "You have proof? We have records, communications, money transfers." The man pulled out a folder. "We wanted to bring this to you first, as a courtesy. Handle it internally rather than let it become a larger problem." Marcus took the folder, flipping through it with no expression. Maya watched him carefully, saw the moment his eyes hardened. He knew what he was looking at, and he didn't like it. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Marcus said, closing the folder. "I'll handle it." "See that you do," the older man said. "We're building a partnership here. Can't have that partnership undermined by people who don't understand loyalty." After the Philadelphia group left, Marcus stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the folder in his hands. His associates waited nervously. Finally, he turned to Lucia. "Get Daniel. Bring him here. Now." Lucia's expression didn't change, but Maya saw understanding flash in her eyes. "On it." Marcus looked at Maya. "You're about to see a different side of this business. If you're not comfortable with confrontation, You can leave now. Maya thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I'll stay. 20 minutes later, Daniel arrived, smiling his usual confident smile. Marcus, you wanted to see me? How did the meeting go? Marcus threw the folder onto the table in front of him. Tell me about your conversations with the Romano family. Daniel's smile faltered. What? I don't know what you're. Don't insult my intelligence, Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. The Romanos have been trying to move into my territories for 6 months. Somehow they keep knowing my moves before I make them. Somehow they keep undercutting my deals at the last minute. And now I have proof that you've been feeding them information in exchange for a promise that they'll give you a better position when they take over. The color drained from Daniel's face. Marcus, I can explain. Explain what? How you betrayed someone who trusted you? How you sold out your own organization for a promise from people who would never honor it? Marcus stepped closer, and Maya saw genuine anger in his eyes. Controlled, focused, but absolutely real. I gave you opportunities, Daniel. I paid you well, treated you fairly, included you in my inner circle, and you repaid that by putting everyone here at risk. They said they'd make me a partner, Daniel said desperately. You never would have. I've been here for 3 years and you bring in outsiders. He shot a look at Maya, and give them more respect than people who've been loyal. Loyal? Marcus's laugh was bitter. You don't know the meaning of the word. Lucia, call Carlos, have him escort Daniel out. And Daniel, if I ever see you in any of my businesses again, if I hear you're working for any of my competitors, if you so much as mention my name to anyone, the Philadelphia people won't be your biggest problem. Are we clear? Daniel looked like he might argue, might plead, but something in Marcus's expression stopped him. He nodded once and was led out by Carlos and one of the other security personnel. After he left, Marcus turned to his remaining people. Everyone, pay attention. This is what betrayal looks like and what happens when you cross lines you shouldn't cross. I don't ask for much, honesty, loyalty, discretion, but those things are non-negotiable. If you have problems with how I run things, come talk to me. If you want to leave, give notice and go. But if you betray this organization, if you put my people at risk, there will be consequences. He dismissed everyone except Maya and Lucia. That's twice now you've had to deal with someone's bad behavior, Marcus said to Maya. Connor Bradley at the restaurant, now Daniel here. What's your assessment? Maya thought carefully before answering. Bradley was impulsive, entitled, someone who'd never been checked before. Daniel was calculating, resentful, someone who'd been planning this for a while. Different motivations, but both had convinced themselves they could get away with it. And how would you have handled Daniel differently than I did? Marcus asked. I wouldn't have, Maya said honestly. You gave him a chance to explain, made your position clear, and removed him from the organization without escalating to something that couldn't be undone. That's measured and appropriate given the circumstances. Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good instincts. Lucia, Maya's off probation. Move her to full status, full access, full salary and benefits as of today. After Marcus left, Lucia turned to Maya with a wry smile. Welcome to the inner circle. That was your real test, by the way. Not the meeting with Philadelphia, but how you'd react to seeing Marcus handle internal discipline. He needed to know you wouldn't flinch. I've seen worse, Maya said quietly, thinking of her military service. I'm sure you have, but this is different. You chose this. You can walk away any time. Lucia's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. We need people like you, people with real training, real principles, who understand the difference between necessary pressure and unnecessary cruelty. Maya went home that night feeling exhausted but oddly satisfied. The work wasn't what she'd imagined, but it wasn't as dark as she'd feared either. Marcus ran his organization with structure and rules, and while those rules existed outside traditional legal frameworks, they existed nonetheless. People understood boundaries. Consequences were clear. It was, in its own way, a more honest system than many she'd operated in before. But as she unlocked her apartment door, she noticed something wrong. The lock had been tampered with, subtle scratches that hadn't been there this morning. Maya's training kicked in immediately. She pushed the door open slowly, listening, watching for movement. The apartment appeared empty, but things had been moved. Drawers opened, papers shuffled. Someone had been here, searching for something. On her kitchen counter, she found a note written in crude block letters. You work for the wrong people. Last chance to change sides. The Romanos take care of their friends. Maya's blood ran cold. Daniel had been removed only hours ago, but the Romanos were already making moves, already trying to intimidate her, already suggesting that Marcus's organization was vulnerable. She pulled out her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. Maya? Someone broke into my apartment, left a message suggesting I should switch sides. She read him the note. Silence on the other end. Then, pack a bag. You're not staying there tonight. I'm sending Carlos to pick you up. We'll get you somewhere safe while we figure out how they found you and what else they know. Marcus, I can handle. This isn't about whether you can handle it. This is about the Romanos making a move against my organization. And you became a target the moment you stood with me today. So pack a bag, lock your door, and wait for Carlos. We'll discuss options when you're somewhere secure. 30 minutes later, Maya was in the back of Carlos's car, her apartment behind her, heading toward an unknown location. She'd been in Marcus's world for less than a week, and already she was caught up in conflicts she barely understood, targeted by people she'd never met, living a life that bore no resemblance to the quiet invisibility she'd sought. But as they drove through the Manhattan streets, she realized something surprising. She wasn't afraid. She was angry. Someone had violated her space, threatened her, tried to intimidate her, and more than that, they'd underestimated her, assumed she'd be easy to scare, easy to turn, easy to use. They were about to learn differently. The car pulled up to a luxury apartment building in Tribeca. Carlos led her to the top floor, to a penthouse that made her studio look like a closet. Marcus was waiting, jacket off, tie loosened, looking less polished than usual. I'm sorry about this, Maya. I should have anticipated they'd move this fast. It's not your fault, Maya said. How did they find me? Daniel probably gave them your information before we confronted him. The Romanos are trying to send a message that my people aren't safe, that I can't protect them, that they should consider switching sides. Marcus poured 2 glasses of water, handed her one. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll set you up in a secure apartment that they won't be able to find. And we'll discuss what comes next. What does come next? Maya asked. Marcus met her eyes. We show them that threatening my people was a mistake. We show them that this organization doesn't fold under pressure. And we do it carefully, strategically, without giving them any excuse to escalate into open conflict. Maya thought about Daniel, about the Philadelphia meeting, about the note on her counter. She thought about the choice she'd made a week ago, the threshold she'd crossed, the life she'd chosen. Tell me what you need me to do, she said. Marcus smiled, not his usual amused expression, but something more genuine. First, get some rest. You've had a long day and tomorrow will be longer. We're going to have to move carefully, gather information, and plan our response. This isn't over, Maya. It's just beginning. After Marcus left her in the guest room, bigger than her entire apartment with a view of the city that must have cost millions, Maya stood at the window and looked out over Manhattan. Somewhere out there, the Romanos were celebrating their intimidation tactic. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably congratulating himself on his betrayal. And somewhere out there, Connor Bradley was living his entitled life, never facing real consequences for his actions. But tomorrow, Maya thought things would start to change. She'd spent months running from who she was, trying to be invisible, trying to pretend her skills and training didn't matter. Now she was going to remind some people exactly why you don't threaten a Marine. The city glittered below her, full of secrets and dangers and opportunities. And for the first time since leaving Seattle, Maya felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Maya woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar luxury surrounding her. The penthouse, Marcus's safe house, the events of yesterday crashed back, Daniel's betrayal, the Philadelphia meeting, the break-in at her apartment, the threatening note. She checked her phone. 6:47 a.m. 3 missed calls from Jamie in Seattle, probably worried because she hadn't answered his usual Sunday evening check-in. She'd call him later after she figured out what to tell him. Hey, little brother, I'm fine. Just had to move to a secure location because a rival organization broke into my apartment. Probably wasn't the reassuring update he needed. The smell of coffee drew her to the kitchen, where she found Marcus already awake, dressed in casual clothes, dark jeans, a simple sweater, looking more approachable than his usual suited formality. He was reading something on his tablet, a half-empty cup of coffee beside him. Good morning, he said, looking up. I hope you slept well. Better than I expected, considering. Maya poured herself coffee from the expensive machine that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be. Have you been up long? Since 5. Old habit. I do my best thinking in the early morning, before the day's chaos begins. Marcus gestured to the seat across from him. We need to discuss the Romano situation and what our response will be. Maya sat, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. I've been thinking about that. They made their move quickly. Too quickly. Daniel was only removed yesterday, but they already had my address. Already had a plan to intimidate me. That suggests they've been preparing this for longer than just Daniel's betrayal. Exactly what I was thinking, Marcus said, approval in his voice. Which means Daniel wasn't their only source. They have other information, other contacts, possibly other people inside my organization. So we need to find out who else is compromised before we make any external moves, Maya concluded. Marcus smiled slightly. You think strategically, that's good. Most people in your position would be pushing for immediate retaliation, wanting to prove themselves. But that's exactly what the Romanos want. For us to act rashly, make mistakes, give them justification for escalation. So what's the plan? Over the next hour, Marcus laid out a careful strategy. They wouldn't go after the Romanos directly. Instead, they'd focus on internal security, reviewing all personnel, identifying potential vulnerabilities, strengthening their own operations. Meanwhile, they'd gather intelligence on Romano activities, document their movements, and build a comprehensive picture of their operations. Information is leverage, Marcus explained. The Romanos think they have the advantage because they scared you, because they demonstrated they could reach my people. But what they've actually done is reveal their hand too early. Now we know they see us as a threat worth intimidating, which means they're worried about something. What are they worried about? Maya asked. That's what we're going to find out. The next 2 weeks became an intensive education in the subtler aspects of Marcus's world. Maya worked alongside Lucia and Carlos, learning how to conduct surveillance, gather information, analyze patterns. They tracked Romano operations across 3 boroughs, documented their business relationships, identified their key personnel. What emerged was a picture of an organization that appeared strong but was actually overextended. The Romanos had expanded too quickly, taking on too many territories, making promises they couldn't keep. They were bleeding money on several fronts and desperate to acquire Marcus's profitable operations to stabilize their position. They're not as powerful as they want people to think, Lucia observed during one of their strategy meetings. They're projecting strength to hide weakness. That's why they're trying intimidation tactics instead of just negotiating fairly. So how do we use that? Maya asked. Marcus, who'd been listening quietly, leaned forward. We make them an offer they can't refuse, but not the kind they're expecting. We offer them a partnership on one specific venture, something small but profitable. We give them what looks like a victory, make them think their intimidation worked. And then? Carlos asked. And then we control the flow of information. Everything they learn about our operations comes through the partnership we control. Every decision they make is influenced by intelligence we provide. We turn their supposed advantage into our surveillance opportunity. Marcus looked at Maya. And you're going to be the primary liaison for this partnership. Maya understood immediately. They'll think they intimidated me into being cooperative. They'll underestimate me. Exactly. And while they're congratulating themselves on having influenced someone in my organization, you'll be documenting everything they do, everything they say, every vulnerability they reveal. Marcus's expression was serious. This is a long game, Maya. Not dramatic, not immediately satisfying, but effective. Can you handle that kind of patience? Maya thought about her military training, about missions that required months of careful preparation for a single operation. I can handle it. The partnership was proposed through neutral intermediaries, a legitimate business consultant who worked with both organizations. Marcus offered the Romanos a share in a profitable import business, framing it as an olive branch, a gesture of cooperation after recent tensions. The Romanos, as predicted, saw it as validation of their intimidation tactics. They agreed immediately. Maya's role was to coordinate logistics between the two organizations, inventory management, delivery schedules, quality control. On the surface, it was mundane administrative work. In reality, it gave her access to Romano operations, personnel, and most importantly, their communication patterns. She met with their representatives twice a week at neutral locations, coffee shops, restaurants, business offices, always professional, always cooperative, always just a little bit nervous as if she were still intimidated by the break-in. The Romanos ate it up, convinced they'd successfully turned someone inside Marcus's organization. What they didn't realize was that every meeting was documented. Every casual comment about their operations was noted. Every complaint about their other business ventures was analyzed. Maya built a comprehensive intelligence file that revealed everything from their financial troubles to internal disputes among their leadership. "They're planning something," Maya reported to Marcus after her 6th meeting. "They keep asking questions about your security protocols, your meeting schedules, the layout of your properties. They're trying to gather intelligence for a more aggressive move." "Let them," Marcus said calmly. "Give them information, but make sure it's information we control. Feed them data that makes us look vulnerable in ways we're actually not." The strategy worked perfectly. The Romanos, believing they had reliable intelligence from Maya, began planning an operation to pressure one of Marcus's smaller business partners into switching sides. They thought they knew when Marcus would be away from the city, when security would be lightest, when they could move with minimal resistance. What they didn't know was that Marcus had arranged the entire scenario as a trap, not a physical trap, but an informational one. When the Romanos made their move, approaching Marcus's business partner with their offer, they found 2 things waiting for them. First, Marcus himself, very much in the city and very well informed about their plans. And second, a federal agent who'd been very interested in documented evidence of territorial intimidation and business interference. Maya wasn't present for that confrontation. Marcus had deliberately kept her away, maintaining her cover as someone who'd been unknowingly providing information. But she heard about it afterward from Lucia. "It was beautiful," Lucia said, unable to hide her admiration. The Romanos walked right into a situation where they incriminated themselves in front of someone with actual legal authority. Marcus didn't have to do anything aggressive. He just let them talk, let them threaten, let them reveal exactly what kind of business they were running. The federal agent now has enough to investigate their entire operation. "And Marcus?" Maya asked. "Clean. Everything he did was documented, legitimate, defensible. He cooperated fully with the investigation, provided evidence of Romano intimidation tactics, positioned himself as a victim of their aggression rather than a participant in anything questionable." Lucia shook her head. "That's why he's successful, Maya. He doesn't fight battles he doesn't have to. He just outmaneuvers people." The Romano organization didn't collapse overnight, but over the following weeks, their influence diminished rapidly. Federal investigation, loss of business partners, internal disputes as their leadership fractured, everything combined to neutralize them as a threat without Marcus ever having to resort to direct confrontation. And through it all, Maya had been the key piece that made the strategy work. "You exceeded my expectations," Marcus told her during a private meeting in his office 6 weeks after she'd started. "You showed patience, strategic thinking, and the ability to play a role convincingly. Those are rare qualities." "I had good training," Maya said, "both in the Marines and from watching you work." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her thoughtfully. "I'm restructuring my organization. Lucia is moving up to oversee all operations. I need someone to take over as head of security and intelligence gathering. Someone who understands both the tactical side and the strategic side. Someone I can trust completely." Maya felt her heart rate increase. "You're offering me Lucia's position?" "I'm offering you a partnership," Marcus corrected. "Not as an employee, but as a genuine stakeholder in my operations. Equity, profit sharing, decision-making authority. You've proven yourself in 6 weeks more than some people do in 6 years. I want you invested in this organization's success, not just working for it." It was everything Maya had never dared to hope for: financial security, professional respect, agency over her own life. But she'd learned to be careful about opportunities that seemed too good. "What's the catch?" she asked. "The catch is that it's permanent," Marcus said seriously. "Once you're a partner, you can't just walk away without consequences. Your decisions affect everyone in this organization. Your loyalty becomes non-negotiable, and you'll be making choices that exist in those gray areas we discussed. Choices that won't always feel comfortable." Maya thought about the last 6 weeks. About outsmarting the Romanos through patience and strategy rather than confrontation. About protecting Marcus's people and interests through intelligence rather than intimidation. About using her skills for something more nuanced than she'd imagined. "I want one condition," she said finally. "Name it. I won't cross certain lines. I won't be part of anything that genuinely harms innocent people. I won't compromise my fundamental principles even if it means walking away from a profitable opportunity." Maya met his eyes directly. "If you can accept that boundary, then I'll accept the partnership." Marcus extended his hand across the desk. "Deal." I've never been interested in harming innocent people anyway. Bad for business and bad for the soul. Welcome to the partnership, Maya. 2 months after she'd punched Connor Bradley across the restaurant floor, Maya stood in her new apartment. A secure, spacious place in a good neighborhood that she actually owned, thanks to the advance Marcus had provided on her partnership stake. She was unpacking the last boxes when her phone rang. Maya! Jamie's voice was excited. You're not going to believe this. The hospital just called. Someone paid off my entire medical debt. All of it. They said it was an anonymous benefactor, but I know it was you. How did you manage that? Maya smiled, looking out her window at the Manhattan skyline. I got a better job, Jamie. A much better job. What kind of job pays well enough to cover $30,000 in medical bills? Security consulting, Maya said, which was technically true. It turns out my military training was worth more than I realized. I'm doing well, Jamie. Really well. And I'm going to keep doing well. After they hung up, Maya finished unpacking and got ready for her evening meeting. A strategy session with Marcus and Lucia about expanding their operations into 2 new territories. She was a partner now, a decision maker, someone whose opinion carried weight. She dressed carefully in professional clothes that she'd purchased with her own money, looked at herself in the mirror, and saw someone completely different from the waitress who'd served pasta 8 weeks ago. That woman had been invisible, powerless, running from her own capabilities. This woman was visible, powerful, and finally using her skills for something that made sense. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Running 10 minutes late. Order appetizers and tell them I'm paying. Maya smiled and headed out into the night. The restaurant where they were meeting was one of Marcus's, upscale, discreet, the kind of place where important conversations happened over excellent food. Maya arrived first and was shown to a private room in the back. As she waited for Marcus and Lucia, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She'd left the Marines searching for peace and found only poverty. She'd tried to be invisible and discovered that invisibility was just another word for powerless. She'd been grabbed by an entitled man who thought she was nobody, and in defending herself, she'd caught the attention of someone who recognized her value. Everything that followed had been a choice. She could have walked away at any point, could have refused Marcus's card in the rain, could have declined the partnership, could have settled for being just another employee rather than a stakeholder. But she'd chosen differently. She'd chosen to acknowledge her skills rather than hide them. She'd chosen to operate in gray areas rather than pretend the world was black and white. She'd chosen power over powerlessness. And yes, there were costs. She'd never be innocent again. Never be able to pretend she didn't understand how power really worked in the world. She'd made compromises with her ideals, even if she'd maintained her fundamental principles. But she'd also gained things she'd never had before: financial security, professional respect, the ability to take care of her brother, and most importantly, the freedom to be fully herself rather than a diminished version designed to fit other people's expectations. Marcus and Lucia arrived together, settling into their seats with the easy confidence of people who knew exactly who they were and what they'd built. Before we start business, Marcus said, raising his glass of water, I want to propose a toast to Maya, who took a chance on an unusual opportunity and turned it into something remarkable, to partnerships built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy, and to continued success for all of us. They clinked glasses and Maya felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she belonged. The meeting that followed was intense, strategic, focused on expansion plans that would require careful execution and smart decision-making. Maya contributed her analysis, challenged assumptions when necessary, and helped shape the strategy that would guide them forward. This was her life now. Not fighting, not serving, not hiding, leading, strategizing, building something sustainable and significant. When the meeting ended and she walked out into the Manhattan night, Maya passed the spot where she'd first stood in the rain 2 months ago, holding Marcus's card and wondering if she should call. That version of herself seemed like someone from another lifetime, uncertain, scared, desperate. This version of herself was none of those things. She pulled out her phone and sent Jamie a message. Just finished a business meeting. Things are good here. Really good. Love you, little brother. His response came immediately. Love you too. I'm proud of you, Maya. Whatever you're doing, I'm proud of you. Maya smiled and headed for the subway. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight, she was content with where she was and who she'd become. The The waitress who'd punched her attacker across the room was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that sometimes the most powerful punch wasn't physical. It was strategic, patient, and perfectly timed. And somewhere in the city, the Mafia boss who'd watched that punch with such interest was probably smoking a cigar and congratulating himself on recognizing potential when he saw it. Maya had no regrets. She'd crossed a line she could never uncross, but she'd done it with her eyes open and her principles intact. That was all anyone could ask for. The subway carried her home through the tunnels beneath Manhattan, and Maya Chen, former Marine, former waitress, current partner in one of New York's most sophisticated organizations, leaned back in her seat and smiled. This was just the beginning.